Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our discussion on emotional intelligence. And so I was just saying before we started the recording that I was just digging around looking for some more illustrations, charts, graphs, anything I could find that is connected with emotional intelligence. And one of the things that I have come to sort of realize and a little bit shocked by it is that the whole thing seems rather loosely structured as far as branding goes, if you will, because all kinds of people are creating all kinds of modifications on all sorts of aspects of emotional intelligence, which leaves you wondering, where's the foundational work? And I guess it goes back to Goleman. Is that right, everybody who's familiar with the world of emotional intelligence?
Yes, it does. It goes back to Daniel Goleman. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he must have just kind of written a book on the subject and put it out there as a book. And because now it's been released kind of to the general public, there's nothing that stops people from, I'm not going to say stealing it, but let's just say using it for their own purposes. And unfortunately, that also means that they have a tendency to modify things that they may not really understand what the original writer or researcher intended. And so it ends up kind of distorting whatever's going on. So as I look at this stuff, all these little random charts that are, you don't find attributions on many of these when you do kind of a Google search for these sorts of images. It's difficult to find out what's legit and what's someone's creative interpretation or repackaging of it. So I'm saying that only to say, as we look at these things, let's take that all instead when we're looking at these things to go like, I don't know, is this official? Is there an official? I really don't know. Is there, like, let me just, I'm going to slide one more in here just a second. I'm going to make a slide for it. I don't even know where it goes anymore. Let's copy this one. Let's paste it there.
While you're pulling that, because I had taken a look at this as well, and there's at least one gentleman that preceded Goldman. I believe his name is Reuven, Reuven Baron.
And obviously he must have written something. So was it like more of a book kind of thing or a scientific research paper?
Yeah, more of the scientific research. The Encyclopedia of Applied Science names this gentleman as well as Goldman, and then someone Meyer Solovey.
Yeah,
Those are the three that they sort of lean on.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Yeah. Because I'm always curious when I look at this. Now, David mentioned Genos, and we have a lot of people in the world of ChangeWorks professionals that are certified in emotional intelligence. And unless I'm mistaken, they all got certified through Genos. And the diagram you see on the screen right now, this is one of Genos's diagrams. It's interesting that they've come up with 6 core emotional intelligence competencies, where if I go back to Goleman's, it seemed like there were 4. And then at some point, someone added, let's see if I can find it. I'm clicking around, don't get seasick as I do this. Someone added motivation. That's also, I guess, adapted from Goleman, working with emotional intelligence. And so I don't mind that things continue to evolve. Certainly our whole point of doing the Circle of Brilliance is that we believe that everything about the ChangeGrid is under constant evolution. So I'm all right with all that. But it's just interesting to kind of see these things and go, okay, how does it all fit? Okay, so with that, unless you guys have got some other comments or thoughts, anything you want to throw out before we launch into T's big question for the day. Anybody, everybody, nobody, somebody?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, then, oh, that's interesting too. It's too small to share. Yeah. So the question is, does this overlay on the ChangeGrid? How would it overlay on the ChangeGrid, and kind of go from that? And so I went to this very first diagram that I have stumbled across in many different kind of different designs, but it's the exact same graphic. And I go like, well, look at that, quadrants. I wonder, how does this overlay on the change grid? Does this overlay on the change grid? Now, in order for us to see if that's actually possible, I don't really know that we can do it just based on the four quadrants and their key labels like self-recognition, social recognition, self-regulation, social regulation. But I could say when it comes to just looking at self versus social, or if we said self versus others, self versus interactions, where does that kind of overlay on the change grid? So when we look at the change grid, do you see anywhere on the change grid where someone might be more likely to be oriented towards relationships and others more oriented towards something other than relationships? Thoughts about that?
Well, it seems to me that perceived ability flows nicely with self, and maybe perceived challenge flows a little bit with others.
Okay, and so let's play with that a little bit. So if the thought is that as our perceived level of ability increases, we are more likely to become more oriented towards ourself or our own kind of agenda versus others or those interpersonal agendas. Okay, thoughts about that? Okay, and then the other thought is that if challenge is going up, do we become more self-oriented or more what do I say, focused? And if its challenge is lower, we tends to be more other oriented. Thoughts about that? Do you guys, anything about that kind of resonating or not resonating?
Yeah, isn't it the upgrade where, or was that outgrade where you're externally focused? I think that's upgrade, yes?
Upgrade tends to be, change tends to be driven. All right, I'll just say, remind the whole thing. Definitive change occurs two places on the change grid: upgrade changes and outgrade changes. Upgrade changes tend to be driven by external factors and outgrade changes tend to be driven by internal factors. So that internal part definitely resonates with self. I don't know that the
Mm-hmm.
external factors, while they may include others, it also includes a lot of other things for those external things like deadlines. Even the deadline could be about somebody else expecting you to be doing something.
Right, but I was thinking about that because, at least from my understanding of how we process emotions, it starts on a very personal level. Like, right? So again, it starts as this mechanistic kind of conditioning is where you're going to first meet it. So what I was thinking is, like, that's a self-expression. Like, it starts, you're meant to like experience it, but the challenge becomes for most people is when they choose to resist it instead of saying, oh, okay, yeah, I have this trigger, now I have the opportunity to actually reframe it.
Yeah,
That's where
yeah.
the whole idea of intelligence or the emotional intelligence side come in. And that's the, because phase one, if you think about like the amygdala, that's on both sides of the brain, right? So it's always scanning something, and it's scanning to make sure that you're safe. And so that's why they always talk about in terms of the midbrain as being like a hub or the seat of emotional processing, because it's like this convergence of all these sensory pathways coming together. And so all those subjective perceptions of whatever it is that triggered what you're experiencing, you have to do something with it. And when I took the emotional intelligence class, that's the first thing they said is it's not enough to just have an emotion, you have to actually know what to do with it. And I think that's where that self-awareness came in, because from there you can move directionally in either, the social part or the relational part, and that's where that reframing starts, or you best position. So to me, it's kind of like consulting the oracle.
Yep. Okay, I think that we're kind of touching on certain basic understandings of different layers of the change grid. So let me give you guys just a quick little review of some key points. And by the way, Tim chatted over to everybody the link or the names of those 3 major models for emotional intelligence. And I've actually pulled up a diagram or 2 from each one of those to share with you guys just in a moment. But let's just have a little bit of fun with this. First of all, look at the composite change grid. And we're only going to be looking at the 4 quadrants. So out grid, up grid, in grid, down grid. Now, when you guys went through your training on comparative emotion, oh good grief, comparative human typological analysis, I told you all these quadrant-based personality systems are fundamentally the same thing. They're just kind of came up with different labels and different ways of getting to those labels and different reasons for wanting to get to whatever the label happens to be. But there have been dozens upon dozens upon dozens of quadrant-based personality typing systems throughout the ages, and some have been very academic and scientific in their foundations, and others are parlor games. Nevertheless, there's a lot of them out there. We're all in agreement on that. In your training section on comparative human typological analysis, I threw out a few questions and I asked you guys to tell me who would fall where. And so, for example, I said, of these 4 types, if you will, although again, the change grid isn't about type, the change grid is more about energy. And so if you fall into one of these quadrants, you may or may not be that type, but for whatever reason, that activity is summoning forth that kind of energy. You might be experiencing that as an in type experience. You might experience as an out of type experience, but nevertheless, the situation is calling upon you to tap into and manifest whatever that energy is within whatever your personality boundaries happen to be. So, and we can talk more about that in detail if you guys want, but nevertheless, I said to you, well, 2 of these quadrants tend to be, yeah, Edie, you don't need to raise your hand, dear. You just go ahead and say whatever you'd like to say. You can unmute yourself. Yep. Yeah. Nope. Okay. Well, you just feel free to chime in whenever. Okay. So 2 of these types, 2 of these quadrants are very fast to take action, do whatever. And 2 of these tend to be more slow. Oh, Edie, you've unmuted. What would you like to say?
You know, I accidentally hit it. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. you just hit that button anytime you want. Okay, so 2 of these quadrants are very fast, comparatively fast, very fast, and 2 of them are comparatively slower, maybe even really slow. So which 2 would you say are fast and which 2 would you say are slow?
I think the bottom 2 are slow, yes?
The bottom 2, so that would be, is it upgrid, outgrid, ingrid, downgrade?
Downgrid.
Downgrid is slow? What else is slow?
Ingrid.
In-grid tends to be
right.
slow. And that means the other 2, outgrid and upgrid, tend to be much quicker in whatever they happen to be doing. Perhaps that's tied to the perceived level of challenge. Something in the challenge is saying, hey, we got to do what we got to do because there's something happening right now that needs attention. And the things that don't have such a high level of challenge, maybe those are, we can just take our time around that. Now, 2 of these tend to be more task focused and 2 of these tend to be more people focused. So which 2 are more oriented towards the tasks at hand and which ones tend to be more about the people that are involved?
Out and down grid are about the task.
Outgrid and downgrid are about the task, meaning upgrid and ingrid tend to be more about the people. And that shouldn't then surprise you when we start overlaying things like social styles and we say, well, this is a driver person. They're fast and task oriented. And an analytical type would be more slow, but task oriented. And the upgrade type tends to be fast and more social, if you will, more people oriented. And the in-grid type tends to be slower and more people oriented. And so we can come up with all kinds of little parameters that are going to kind of help whoever's developing a quadrant-based system to decide what goes into which quadrant. And the fun one I always had is that one of these types is notoriously late. One of these types is notoriously early. one of these types is precisely on time, and one of these types believes that the meeting begins when they get there. So which one falls where?
Wow.
In-grid is early.
Always
out-grid
early. Why is the in-grid always early?
They're over-prepared. They have perceived challenges. Everything's going to go wrong on the trip. There's some anxiety, actually,
There is.
and
Now,
there's not overconfidence.
yeah,
about
and
being
I'll throw
in-grid.
another one out there. Two of these are very big picture oriented, and two of these are very detail oriented. So detail, I'm not going to throw you guys a quiz question, but certainly analytical people tend to be detail oriented, and in-grid people tend to be detail oriented, but they're detail oriented about people and relationships, and down-grid tends to be detail oriented about whatever the facts are, whatever the task at hand happened to be. So, and then up-grid, we got the big picture. So is it at all surprising that the person who is in-grid is likely to arrive early because they're the ones that are detail focused about other people, about, that sort of thing. They want to make sure coffee's made and everybody's comfortable and blah, blah, blah. Okay, who arrives notoriously late?
Out-grid.
Up-grid.
Mhm.
Oh,
Up-grid.
up-grid?
Up-grid. Oh yeah, why is up-grid notoriously late?
Because they're stressed out and they just have so much going on and
So much
confusion
going
and
on. That's right.
distraction.
Big picture, easily distracted, lots of stuff going on. Look, they're up in power stress and stress. So that's not surprising at all. Downgrid, first of all, downgrid generally doesn't want to go to the meeting, but if they are going to go to the meeting, they end up walking in the door right at the start time.
Mhm.
So they don't come early at all if they can possibly avoid it. But the outgrid people believe that the meeting starts when they get there.
Mhm.
How many of you can kind of feel that in any kind of executive behavior, senior management behavior? So for them, they're never late. Things start when they get there. And it's just the kind of way that it is. So, if we start to just be reminded of those things, the other thing I want to remind you of is a radial trend on the change grid. So let's start with looking at the 4 danger zones. Your options are being self-oriented, being self and other oriented, and being self, other, and information oriented. Okay. So there's no place on the change grid where you're going to be exclusively information oriented with nothing self, nothing others going on. It's more of an additive and subtractive kind of a thing. So where on the change grid is all of your energy going to be focused on self-preservation, self-whatever, self. Where on the change grid do we find that? This is
Up-grid.
okay. Very far up grid, self-oriented. Why would someone who's very far up grid be self-oriented?
Panicked.
They're panicked, right? The bear is chasing them. Unless, did you guys see the little article about the 17-year-old gal
Yeah.
who didn't even know what the animal was? She's out there pushing it off the fence. It's hysterical. That's an upgrade response about saving your babies, because she had her puppies, I guess, or her dogs were down on the ground. Anyway, so I get that. There's a real threat involved. You got to be self-oriented. That's in a danger zone. Any place else you think someone's going to be self-oriented?
I'm thinking maybe downgrid.
Down-grid.
Yeah.
Down grid. Okay, so if I'm way down grid, I'll cut to the chase and give you guys the real theme here. All 4 danger zones are completely self-oriented.
All right.
So think about that. Why is the outgrid danger zone person, in what way are they self-oriented?
Got
It's
it.
just all about me.
It's all about me, my success, my me. I watched that mini series on Halston. Oh, there you go. There's a perfect example of this outgrid danger zone kind of behavior and how it ends up spilling into the other danger zones by the time the whole story is told. But nevertheless, outgrid danger zone. very little care about how other relationships are impacted. It's, blinders on, all those kinds of things. So self-orientation there. There's a kind of a grandiosity that's kind of connected there. The person who's downgrid is self-oriented, but I don't know if they're self-oriented as much as they've removed themselves from other relationships and everything. They're just kind of like that loner, in a kind of an isolated sort of a world. And the in-grid person is very withdrawn. And so part of the reason why they are self-oriented is because they really don't have the self-esteem to interact with others, or they may be in that in-grid danger zone because of the impact of how out-grid people and up-grid people and even down-grid people might be imposing certain things on them. So self-orientation for different motivations, but nevertheless, self-orientation occurs outside of this red circle. Now, when you get between the red circle and the green circle, now there's room, if you will, energetically, there's room to include the needs of, what do you think?
Other people.
So
other
it's,
people.
again, you're still interested in yourself, but you're including other people in what's going on. So here you have, if it's an upgrade kind of a thing, in the danger zone, may be wholly focused on self-preservation. And with the exception of someone's own children, where they would probably be not surprisingly willing to sacrifice self for their offspring. Generally, if we don't have that level of a relationship, I'm going to be taking care of me. And then, okay, if it isn't such a huge threat, I might try to help other people out of the burning. This is how people get trampled, is when people no longer care about others. They're just trying to get their own self in a safe environment. Well, if they don't feel that threatened, they may very well be willing to help those that are struggling, or other people, general population, etc. When we're talking about outgrid behavior, the person in the outgrid danger zone just cares about how whatever that task focus leads to is pleasing them. Now here they start to recognize others are involved and include others in whatever's going on. So there's a lot more participation, a lot more integration going on here. Even if I go in between, the person who's here on the change grid 6 and 12, as we talked about last time, they are using charm and all kinds of other things as a substitute for them, because they've got their own agenda. They're just trying to really get what they want out of it. Now that's a very narrow kind of band, but in just between the green circle and the red circle in that same general area, now they become romancing, suave, and kind of inclusive, more in a party sort of a way if we're more upgrid, and more of a purposeful sort of way if we're a little bit on the outgrid side of things. Okay, so you guys get the idea. And around down grid, same thing's going to happen. I've got my close friends or whatever, my buddies. If I'm this far down grid, the people I feel comfortable with, my colleagues, etc. So we're all kind of in this down grid sort of mode together, and that's all fine. But I'm also fine if I'm just kind of alone in that. And then in-grid, certainly the in-grid energy expresses itself when others are involved. Otherwise, this withdrawal part isn't really what an amiable is all about. It's an amiable on their most restricted kind of day, but really they want to be between the green and the red circle, where they can be caring for others and working for others. And yeah, that's going on. Now, again, they are still self-oriented, but they are self and other. Now, once we move inside of the green circle, we can add that information sort of thing. Information orientation just means I'm willing to acknowledge that I am aware of things, I'm observing things, there is a truth, there are things that are real. So I have room for whatever that actual truth may be. And that's going on. As we move away from the center of the change grid, truth tends to be sacrificed if necessary in order to get things moving in the direction, or ultimately for me to get what I really want. There is no reason for truth to, be involved anymore. That information, I've become now very selective about that information, or I've created my own reality. Same thing is going to be true if I'm moving up grid, down grid, or in grid. Okay, was that a good reminder for everybody? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So now if we go back to this idea about these things overlaying on the change grid, well, where is self-recognition? Where is social recognition? I don't find this lends itself to an immediate overlay. So I thought, well, let's take a look at what they've put below each one of these. And apparently some other chart said these were Goldman's 20 competencies. And there were 3 in the area of self-awareness. So I think that's what these really are, is this chart there. I think they laid it out a little bit better, whoever that lynda.com happens to be. So when I go about this, all right, I could say, where do each of these 20 lay on the change grid? And will any kind of a pattern arise from doing that? So some of these kind of grab my eye right away, like self-confidence. Well, where does self-confidence tend to reside on the change grid?
The PowerPoint.
The PowerPoint, and
Heartline.
what direction from there? What's its kind of like range, would you say?
And the hurt line out, out.
On the heart line, a little bit more there. Now that's when we're talking about genuine self-confidence. People that are down grid may very well represent themselves as being confident in what they know. But what's the problem with the knowledge that people that are down grid possess? There's an upside and a downside everywhere on the change grid. So what's going on down here that could be problematic when it comes to true self-confidence?
They probably let that knowledge sit for an awfully long period of time without evaluating it or getting any new input into whatever the issue is.
Right.
So it could be stale.
Yeah. And so while they may be expressing themselves as being self-confident, or even describing themselves as being self-confident, we know downgrade there is an assumption of control. And I'm assuming still have every reason to be confident. Okay, so maybe that's it. And then there ends up being an illusion of control because stuff keeps changing and we don't necessarily recognize it or adapt to it. And so I think we're going to hear confidence bantered about in the downgrid area. But when I think about true self-confidence, my way of looking at that is saying, like, I have accurately assessed the situation that I am in, and I have accurately assessed my ability to manage that situation that I am in, and I am confident that I can meet that challenge. I can do what needs to be done. To Kathy's point, that would live right along the heart line. Obviously, where on the heart line is going to be dictated by the ratio, or by the level of challenge and the level of ability. The higher both of these get, perhaps the greater the test is of someone's real self-confidence. And I would also say that beyond well, in the danger zone, that self-confidence could become highly inflated. So it could just be bravado. They're still going to say they're confident. Maybe they have every reason to be, but they're going to, they may display that in a different way or carry themselves in a different sort of way. Okay, so again, if we just look at this idea about self-confidence, I kind of go, well, that's kind of an out-grid, mid-grid to out-grid kind of a thing. And if I said, let's look at accurate self-assessment, where on the change grid do you think someone's going to do the best job of an accurate self-assessment?
Same place.
Same place, perhaps leaning a little bit what direction?
In.
I like that. I like that. There's a gentleness that gets added. I was thinking a little bit down because there is an analytical element. Anytime I see assessment, my head just goes, well, there's some kind of an analysis going on, some kind of thing going on. I don't really know that someone who's leaning upgrade is going to be doing a very good job at self-assessment. Do you guys agree with that? Disagree with that? Yeah.
I
And
would
certainly
agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, and certainly the further upgrade we go, the weaker our self-assessment skills are, less accurate they're going to end up becoming. And by the way, that may be that we begin to minimize what we have available to us. So self-assessment doesn't necessarily mean that we're always aggrandizing. It may very well be that we're also minimizing what's going on. So I want to, if I want to do that well, I feel like I got to be inside of the green circle. We'll say that. In order for that to occur. So to kind of make a long story short, when I look at emotional self-awareness, accurate self-assessment, whatever that translates into, and I think there's another chart that gives us a breakdown of some of these, and self-confidence, I'm kind of feeling that these things would be mid-grid, leaning maybe slightly out-grid, slightly down-grid, in-grid. And so that's what I'm going like, I kind of feel like I'm just right here. You guys agree, disagree? Edie, I see your hands up again. So if you got anything you want to rattle off, you go right ahead.
No, I see it as I see the in-grid loud and clear, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So you mean pure in-grid or just leaning a little bit in-grid?
Certainly leaning that way.
Leaning that way, yeah, because I don't really think that in-grid danger zone is sizing them up quite as accurately as this would imply, as far as personal competence is concerned. Now, when we start looking at self-regulation, emotional self-control, integrity, achievement drive, adaptability, initiative and innovation, and learning orientation. Well, I'm going to say 4, maybe 5 out of those 6 land where on the change grid?
Mid-grid or midpoint, PowerPoint to slightly out-grid.
To slightly out-grid. Okay, so let's take a look at those again and tell me which of these do you feel is the most out-grid? Emotional self-control, trustworthiness, conscientiousness. Oh, this is a different chart. See, they come with these different words. Self-control. Wait, where am I at? Sorry. Awareness, self-control, transparency, adaptability, achievement drive, and initiative.
Yeah, those are out-grid.
Achievement drive initiative is out-grid.
Yeah.
Achievement drive, and that is out-grid. Someone else threw in there. No, achievement drive and initiative still the same. Let's see if there's any of these other charts. Over here, personal competence, regulation, pursuing goals and opportunities despite obstacles and setbacks, handling change flexibly. I don't know so much about acting in congruence with values and keeping disruptive emotions and impulses in check. Those don't feel as out-grid. In fact, if anything, I think if you're very far out-grid, you could throw these 2 out the window.
Yeah.
So, all right. So again, I'm kind of seeing that, oops, where are we at? Click on the other diagram. I kind of feel like, well, part of it feels quite in-grid or quite mid-grid, and a lot of it is leaning a bit further out-grid. Certainly when I think about initiative and drive, its healthy expression is going to be that driven driver. And hopefully we're saying energetically, they're an amiable driven driver. They haven't forgotten that other people are still involved. Otherwise we get into a different set of trouble. All right, so, all right. Let's take a look at another one of these little quadrants. I kind of like this one better. That's personal competence, relationship. Okay, so adaptability. Where would you put adaptability on the change grid? That's a gifted student's basic quiz question.
I think it's at the PowerPoint.
It's at the PowerPoint, but with a moment we say adapt, what are we implying?
Action.
An action is being taken. So I'm no longer exactly on the center of the change grid. Nothing happens at the center of the change grid other than a bunch of glorious things. So
is there also some compliance if you have to adapt to what is?
Is there compliance? how about I would say that a negotiation with reality has occurred.
Okay.
So compliance also often carries a feeling of I'm acquiescing, I'm
Mhm.
following the rules, I'm obeying something, as opposed to that little negotiation that I've just described. It says, no, I got to accept reality for what it is. And I can't argue with the fact of reality. And so I don't know that I am being compliant as much as I'm accepting some of the stuff that's part of reality. I'm circling around here because this is where on the change grid, creative problem solving lives. So I'm adapting to some change. Do you think that change that I'm adapting to when we're talking about, again, how are they framing it? They're calling it, wait, too many of these charts, they all should just reach agreement. Self-regulation, this idea about adaptability, implies that something is changing. And it feels to me like they're saying something outside of myself is changing. And so that to me carries with it a little bit of an upgrade energy, a problem that needs to be solved. You guys with me on that?
Yeah.
So it's still a bit of an outgrade energy that's happening there. It might even be a little downgrade because there's an analytical element involved in adaptation or whatever. And so if this is holding true, then what we're basically saying is that self-management, regulation of self-management is an outgrid overlay. Emotional self-control, trustworthiness, conscientiousness, adaptability, achievement drive, initiative. I can tell you that these things do overlay outgrid. Yeah.
So T, do you think we'll ever have the ability to read a change grid and pull some of this stuff from it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, we can now. We certainly can now. So for example, I think that a lot of these is just restating what we already know about a lot of areas on the change grid. And this is why I've always wanted to be able to say things like emotional intelligence are brilliant, but it's brilliant because it's describing humanity from a particular vantage point. The change grid attempts to unify all perceptions of humanity into a single model. So what we're trying to do is say emotional intelligence has something that it is contributing to our overall understanding of the way humans operate. And by merging that brilliance into what we already know to be true, based on other merging exercises that have occurred, we are getting a more detailed, complete, robust, deep, rich understanding. But the change grid then is going to come along and say, and while we appreciate the contributions that you have made to our clarity, we can contribute to you the blind spots in what your model is doing. And that's not necessarily a criticism because they may very well have set out to do nothing but to describe 4 subquadrants on the change grid. And so I don't mind, I'll just jump to the gifted student solution. I don't mind telling you that as we do this deep dive into the emotional intelligence lives right here on the change grid. It's these 4 subquadrants: the driven expressive, the expressive driver, the amiable driver, and the analytical expressive. These are the energies we tend to find in the world of emotional intelligence. Some of them may spill a little bit more down into the driven analytical. Some might feel a little bit more driven than others, but you are not in the world of emotional intelligence going to find much of anything that resonates with the true downgrid energy or the true upgrid energy, or certainly not the in-grid energy. And I think the reason for it is because part of the whole structure or the whole place that emotional intelligence fits is when we are getting along with other people with some sort of an intention something is really going on. It doesn't really talk about emotional intelligence, how we get along with our best buddies when we're, lounging around and drinking a beer and talking about nonsense. That's not what's really talking about. It's saying like, no, we're in some sort of a situation where we are called upon to do something more effectively. And to do that well requires both IQ and EQ. You guys need to unmute and chime in about what I've just said.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I would describe emotional intelligence as, is that ability to respond emotionally effectively in any situation of challenge, high or low, whatever it is.
Yep. Yep.
Just as that's my sort of, what would the term be? Just my little script when I think about it. So,
That's the
And
frame you put around it, right? Go ahead, Edie.
Yeah, I think it's also a matter of spontaneity, of quickly, assessing a situation and creating a new response if needed. So whether you call that adapting,
Yep.
But spontaneity, I think, is a real
Yeah.
appropriate
And even
term.
when we talk about things like being able to read a room, reading a
Mhm.
room, this is an up and out grid kind of a behavior. There's a challenge that's involved, and we are trying to apply the ability we have and learn more. We're trying to gain and grow, and so that's what it is. If I look at this list of emotional intelligence attributes, and I go, all right, well, do any of these resonate with downgrid? So empathy, service orientation, organizational acumen, appreciating diversity. When I look at all those, you guys can certainly throw in your no more 2 cents, throw in your whole quarter, if you will. I think I'm hearing amiable driver behaviors.
Mhm.
That's exactly what I was thinking, T. And
Yeah.
when I think about the DE&I work that I do relative to emotional intelligence, we talk about creating inclusive work environments, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
and
creating-
I'll throw in that when we think about the four main roles in the C-suite, so CFO, CEO, chairman, and COO, which of those four do you think is more naturally aligned to things like diversity?
Right. And unfortunately, we don't see that chief HR person moving up into that top leadership role of CEO.
And that's the real issue. And so the CEO tends to be the expressive driver, and the chairman is the driven driver, and the CFO tends to be the analytical driver. Well, we got that COO who's really said, yeah, I'm task oriented. I'm driven. We got to get all the stuff done. I get that. But I got to manage the people and the resources and coordinating who we got, where we got. So HR as a role would resonate very well with that amiable driver kind of energy. And so I kind of see that sitting in very, very well. Can you imagine an HR department populated with nothing but driven drivers? All right. It's like,
Been there.
I mean, my experience, most business owners, most CEOs, most CFOs consider HR to be a necessary evil.
Mm.
Yes.
Nothing that's really contributing to the bottom line, but in fact is consuming resources.
Can I give you a funny story on that, T?
Please do. Please do. Yeah.
So we were, when I was working with a major communications firm, we had business market call centers. And I was asked to interview this gentleman that we were considering for director of a new call center down in Florida. And so when I went to pick him up from the office that he had just had his interview with, and I was taking him back to my office, which was located in the call center. And he said to me, man, I'm so glad to meet you and, get away from all those HR types, because he had been up on the HR floor interviewing with the leaders from HR. And yeah, and so we take a couple of more steps, and then he says, so what do you do?
Yeah.
Well, I'm the HR guy for the call center here in Atlanta. His face got red, and you can imagine the rest of his day was just shot. And
Yeah. Wow. And that tells you a whole lot.
long
Right?
flight back home he had.
a long
I've,
fought.
I've had different experiences with HR. I've worked with and in and consulted to very hard driving HR organizations.
Mhm.
Whether they were effective or not is another story. But I have worked with HR people who were highly aligned
Yeah.
with the CEO and really, bottom line oriented and all of those things. But in those instances, in many instances, they also were driving policies that
Hmm.
ultimately I thought were unsustainable.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that because um, I will tell you from doing a lot of speaking engagements for you guys know SHRM, SHRM, the Society for
Oh, yeah,
Human
of course, yeah,
Resource Management, SHRM.
yeah.
Okay, when you go and you're spending a weekend at a SHRM kind of convention, you do notice there are a few SHRM people who really could be CEOs or chairmen or CFOs. Personality wise, they have the drive that they got an issue, they got an agenda. They do not hesitate to take it out there. But I will also say that from a stereotypical perspective, they are the exception to the norm. You guys agree with that, or what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What's
because
your
a lot of it is perception of that practice, of that part of the business.
right? And it's because of people's perception about it and the way that I think that it's been kind of relegated historically, it's going to attract a certain population or a certain kind of person. And when you think about the way HR is even compensated, so I don't know how many HR people are going to be making 500,000 plus. I'm sure there's a few out there.
I know them. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. I mean, they're in big pharma companies and
Right. Yeah.
top HR people get a lot
They
of,
do. They do.
and
Now,
yeah.
those of you with a strong background in HR, do you guys can you remember the fight that HR professionals had to go through in order to get that respect and get
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it needed leaders, and that's why I'm saying like these people that are coming to the front that are not that stereotypical HR person that in Tim's example, the other guy was just kind of dismissing. Um, they needed these trailblazers. They needed these people who were going to say, no nonsense here. This is exactly what needs to happen. I mean, look, HR is the one who saves companies from all kinds of lawsuits. So, you know, they have a very strong role, but someone has to be willing to step into that role and not acquiesce to the driven driver personalities that might be out there. Yeah. Okay, so just to kind of finish this little thing, let me show you another little quadrant here. So this idea about building relationships, communication, developing others, facilitating team performance, managing conflict, building influence, catalyzing change, inspirational leadership. When I hear those and I look at those, I'm hearing expressive driver behaviors, expressive driver energy. So I'll go back to those again. Just think, okay, an expressive driver is a driver, first and foremost. They want to move things forward. They want things to happen. But their way of going about it, remember the secondary energy always answers how the person achieves the driver objectives. They achieve those objectives by being that expressive energy. And that expressive energy is all about motivating others and building energy here, getting along, handling conflict, clearly expressing ideas and information. We say one of the hallmark skills of true leadership is the ability to articulate a compelling vision, using sensitivity to another person's feeling to manage interaction successfully. This is definitely an expressive driver kind of quality. If I go back to this one, no, that's a different one. That's from Goldman. Developing others, influencing skills. We know the most effective sales professionals tend to be expressive drivers. They communicate very well. Conflict management, I don't think they're going to sit down at a table like a mediator. or anything like that. But in the moment, in the throes of the conflict, they've got a way to kind of like step in there and calm it down. So if two people are about to get to fist fights, I promise you, it is an expressive driver that's going to step in and say, wait a minute, guy, go to your corners or whatever. Visionary leadership, catalyzing change, building bonds, teamwork and collaboration. These are all attributes of the expressive driver. Okay. Can you guys see that, or yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, because whoever put these charts together doesn't understand what we understand about the change grid, yes, some of their descriptors might lean a little bit on the amiable side of things. So that whole thing about collaboration, I would say collaboration may sit on this line right here between expressive driver and amiable driver. This is where teamwork and collaboration really lives. Does it belong more to an amiable energy or an expressive energy? Well, I would think that someone who is in that function probably has to be able to manage both of those, because sometimes teamwork is about being enthusiastic and focused and visionary, and sometimes it's about making sure people are getting along and we got who we need doing what we need them to do and all those good sorts of things. So respect and in fact, Tim had a profile he put together for a client, and I believe, Tim, you'll have to correct me, one of those is about respecting one another.
Yes.
And was the other one about being courteous, or
Yes.
what was that what it was about? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And so when I think about someone really practicing mutual respect and mutual courtesy and all those sorts of things, that to me feels like an expressive to an amiable kind of an energy. That's really going on
Mhm.
there. Yeah. And so I guess just to bring this to closure, I just wanted to say that I do believe, and we will dig into a little bit deeper because I do want to show you some of these other diagrams that might throw a little bit of a question mark into it. I do believe that emotional intelligence, in general conceptual terms and in general descriptive ways, overlays on the change grid, but it does not go to the full coverage. It's confined a bit more to these four quadrants here.
It sounds like to me what you described in those four quadrants is value judgment intelligence. So you can call that BQ. So maybe
Oh,
that's the
ooh.
intersection
See, now there you go.
where
You just create your own
EQ and
program.
IQ come together.
Right. You can market that. I'm telling you, put a brand, slap a brand on it. You got that.
Because
Well,
that's something that people don't necessarily do well, particularly if you're overwhelmed. If your amygdala hijacked and your emotions are overwhelmed and you don't have any availability or accessibility of cognition,
right.
you can, things can get out of hand quite quickly.
Right, right. Well, and even let's just talk about values for a second. Maybe that's a subject we should just focus on for a Circle of Brilliance session. But I think, first of all, everybody's got values. I don't care what their personality is. I don't care what their background is. I don't care. They got whatever values they have. So we all have our values. The question is, when we decide to express our values, when we choose to live our values, when we choose to, what to say, share them or try to promote them or whatever, do you think we do that if we're down grid in power, apathy, and apathy?
No,
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 No. And do you think I really do that if I'm in grid?
no.
Now, I've
no.
got my values, but I may very well keep my values very much to myself, very quiet, not really express them because talk about conflict management. The in-grid energy is conflict averse. And
Yeah,
so,
see, that's the work. That's what Dr. Hartman, Robert Hartman, his work is
mhm,
now housed at University of Tennessee. He's known
yeah,
as the father
on
of
whole brain. Yeah.
axiology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And his whole thing was about it's not our values that make the decision in a moment. Because again, how do you explain a person? He said our values tend to have a hierarchy. So,
Yeah.
like a person will say something like, there's nothing more important than family, but yet they're a workaholic.
Yeah. Right.
So he
Exactly.
says it's really our value wing. is
Yeah,
what
and
he
how they
distinguished.
frame something based
Right.
on those values, etc. Well, to me, that whole set of activities, or that whole action, is happening here on the change grid. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm expressing whatever those values may be one way or another, or I'm working with those values or inside of those values. I'm living my values. So I may have them, but am I living them? And by the
Mm.
way, I will tell you that a lot of people are living their values that they don't even realize their values, and they're living them. So for
Mm.
example, the people that are very far down grid, that are basically the couch potatoes, we can't say they don't have any values. They have values. They value being a couch potato.
Mm.
And that's fine, that's up to them, but own it and say, no, my whole goal in life, like when Lynn and I were first talking about our move to Panama, I said that my goal during retirement is to perfect the afternoon nap. So that's I would like my life's purpose in retirement to be perfecting the afternoon nap. Well, okay, fine. Maybe that means I really do value an afternoon nap. I promise you that's not an outgrid or an upgrade kind of a value play. So there you go. There you all go. All right. So let's see. So our time's up for today, but maybe that's a good place for us to end anyway. So I think we're looking at this little overlay that in no way diminishes what we know about emotional intelligence. The question is going to be, how does it now position the change grid to expand on emotional intelligence? What's happening with emotional intelligence as we move out grid, too far out grid or down grid, or anywhere outside of that region on the change grid? Now,
Hmm.
is that where we're going to find emotional stupidity? What's the opposite of intelligence? I don't know what word to give it that isn't offensive. So what lives here? If emotional intelligence lives there, well, where does it go? What happens to it? What's it all happening?
T, this is a whole open book to another discussion, but I'm thinking that a lot of in-grid people aren't necessarily designing, choosing, or desiring where they are, but it's more of a default place.
I agree.
Okay, because of fear of all.
Because of
I was married to
conditioning.
someone like that, and I think it was a default. Yeah, he was a coach.
It's
Yeah.
about conditioning. It's about
Yes. Yes.
opportunities being available to
Mhm.
them. It's about tradition, habit, routine, but it's also something that's been instilled in somebody.
Mhm.
So, where do
Mhm.
those voices of doubt? Why is the world small? And as we're saying all that, I want you guys to keep in mind that anytime we say something like that or think something about that, that is us as an
Mhm.
outgrid or a more upgrid person, as one of these people that I'll at least say has a little bit more emotional intelligence. We are imposing a value set on somebody else. People that
Mhm.
live in grid don't know that they live in grid. They just know that they might be very happy in what they're doing, very content, living a glorious life. And
Mhm.
and who are we to be looking at that and judging it as anything other than that? Now, if they're living that life and it was not their choice, or it's being
Mhm.
imposed upon them, then yeah, that would upset us on a lot of levels. But I don't want to ever say that anyone has to live an outgrid life, or people have to
Mhm.
live a life of vision, mission, purpose, and all that. Why can't they just live their life? And
Right.
If it's by choice, T,
if
but
it's by
don't.
choice, right?
If it's by choice,
If
yeah.
it's by
Okay.
choice. And if it's not by choice, then we have to get into our own values and say, who are we to now go and intervene?
Mhm.
And at what point do we intervene? Et cetera. So anyway, there's a lot that's going on,
Mhm.
but that's the question is, if this is where emotional intelligence lives, what I know is that people of emotional intelligence don't get to spend all day, every day there. So
Mhm.
what happens when situations are elsewhere on the change grid, um, or where are their own elements of again, I don't want to say emotional stupidity. Come up with a better word for that, but whatever the opposite of emotional.
Emotional ignorance.
What's that, David?
Emotional ignorance.
Ignorance. Okay, fine. There you go. Emotional ignorance. That's fine. But there's a lot more going on. And I think the ChangeGrid can contribute greatly to the overall understanding of emotions and intelligence and blah, blah, blah. All right. Anyway, so if you guys find that interesting, do join us, if you will, on Tuesday's call. We'll pick up where we left off. So with that, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Bye for now.
Bye.